Big news! The votes are in, and the Stinger missile test is now officially a thing. Well, that is until Kumo changes his mind. So while we have the provisional approval from that fickle fuzzball, let's move on to the next victim in our Living With series, and that is the 2018 Lexus LS500. However, this one is different than the previous two we have driven, in that this one, the suspension's different. You know what? I'll tell you the changes later, but let's get on to the most important test of living with an LS500 F-Sport. Something tells me this ain't gonna go so well, but let's give it the old college try. One missile is about the best we could hope for. Not exactly. How about this? That's a big not exactly as well. Oh, I got an idea. Let's try sideways from the top. No. See, here's the problem. Imagine if we were not in the confines of an airport and you got pulled over with that. Something tells me that I would be doing the perp walk much like Harvey Weinstein is today. Oh, wait a minute. I got a better idea. Ingenuity is the mother of invention. And hopefully, speaking of mothers, you don't have any kids in the back seat of your F-Sport, because the missile definitely won't fit. Okay, and then we get like that, get it up there, and there's no gas in it. Now, let's drive it. Back again, and what we learned up at Skywalker Ranch is a wonderful car, the 2018 Lexus LS500. But this time, something's different. It is the F-Sport, which begs the question, what exactly makes an F-Sport? Well, could it be the engine? Well, 3.5 V6 twin turbo, 416 horsepower, 442 pounds of torque. That sounds awfully familiar, and it is, because that's exactly the same engine, the same output. So that, once again, begs the question, what makes up an F-Sport? Now that is indeed an excellent question, especially when you consider it's not just the engine that's the same, it's also details like the weight distribution of this two-wheel drive here. 53 in the front, 47 in the back. So is it a page out of the old Buick T-type marketing book, or are there some substantive changes? Turns out there are a couple, biggest being the brakes. In the front goes from a 14-inch diameter rotor to 15.7. In the back goes from 13.1 to 14.1. But it's not just the rotors, it's also the calipers. In the front, it goes from 4-piston to 6-piston. In the back, 2 to 4. But then there are the wheels. Now, I'm well aware that the two cars we drove up north, those had 20-inch wheels. Here, 20s are fitted as standard, but it's not just the wheels, it's the tires that change as well. In the front, it goes from 245/50 to 245/45. But in the back, much bigger change, goes from 245/50 to 275/40s. Now, there is another huge change, probably bigger than the brakes, but it all has to do with how this car is built here. Serial number ending 803. Basically, to make an F-Sport really an F-Sport, it's got to be built like this. And that is, this car is fitted with a performance package, and there are a number of things that are added to a performance package version of an LS500, but the big thing we need to understand is this has a variable version of the steering. It's like VIGS, VRGS, whatever Lexus calls it, but that is for the front steering. And then there is an active rear wheel steering, but it only applies to this car because this one is a rear wheel drive. One can have a F-Sport Lexus LS500 in all-wheel drive, but you lose the concept of rear wheel steering. And then there are active stabilizer bars. So this has quite a bit different of a suspension setup in addition to those brakes we talked about back in the hangar. So please do not try this at home. Put our foot into it, all ridiculous amounts of length on a canyon road, and I have to say it is, I'm not going to say it's confidence inspiring. It's not that big of a difference between the sedan we drove on those stunning roads around Skywalker Ranch and this. I will say it's a bit sharper, and at that it's a wee bit sharper. Big thing that happens here is this car is not designed to do this. It doesn't really want to be like an AMG S63. I don't think it's trying to be that, because really it's not an F, it's an F Sport, which is kind of like M Sport or the AMG E43 variants, that kind of stuff. but this is in the longer wheelbase. And that's where the combination of wheelbase and the lower aspirations make this not a sports sedan, but a sharper luxury sedan. As you saw, sometimes this transmission just does not like the downshift. We found that out when we drove the car, at least the gasoline version, up around Skywalker Ranch. Got turned way too wide. If you've been watching the show for a while, you know that this road has a lot of historical significance to me, because this is where I raced a downhill, actually the most winning downhill skateboarder in the world. His name's James, great guy, in a Cadillac CTSV, and believe it or not, there were times I couldn't keep up with him. This was the only part of the road that I could keep up with him. When we got into the turns, he would smoke me, like walking away from me. Anyway, this, I wouldn't want to rematch him in this car because it probably can't get around turns as fast as that Cadillac. So yes, there is a difference here. The driving dynamic setup, it is noticeable. If I were selecting an LS500, it would have to be an F-Sport, but I think the concept of an F-Sport all-wheel drive, I don't know if it's a big enough difference, because you don't get most of the changes we're talking about, which is the active rear-wheel steer, which pays off here in that it makes that long wheelbase a little bit shorter, and I think that's the biggest thing you take away. Let's try it again here. Beautiful hairpin turn, cut a little tighter this time. Yes, this is a wonderful road, I know. Yeah, you can definitely tell. It feels like instead of a 123-inch wheelbase, when you're driving this thing aggressively, it feels more like, you know, like the E-Class and the 5 Series, which is more about 115, 117-inch wheelbase. That's what it feels like going around some of these turns. I think that's the biggest benefit of the S-Sport in terms of where the rubber meets the road. Okay, so not exactly the Yaguchi-san goodness that's been handed down by Mount Fuji itself, that is the GSF and the RCF, but throughout this episode we're starting to see there are some mechanical changes, small though they may be, that amount to some sharpness to a large car. But it's not just that. There are some cosmetic changes, like in the front, the grille changes. There are some trim changes on the exterior. Interior, there are some trim changes, but there are two that we need to talk about in here. Number one, someone pilfered that sliding tachometer, speedometer thing from the LFA, and I always love me some sliding tachometer, speedometer thing. So arigato gozaimasu. And then there are the seats, and it's not just a color and trim change like there's some Alcantara here and some color here, but it's also the adjustments. And yeah, this goes backward and forward, but this pivots up here. And then, as if someone has taken inspiration from Aladdin's carpet ride, this literally rolls out to extend the length of the seat bottom. And I think the only thing I would say here is, Assalamu alaikum. And with that, let's really live with this thing, which means passing Toyota Camrys in a neighborhood that this car really would exist, and that is Pacific Palisades. Stunning little enclave, kind of on the edge of Los Angeles, right on the Pacific Ocean. So I've gotten away from the Sport Plus mode we were just doing, and I'm in my homebrew. And homebrew, as with the Mercedes and the BMWs, it's full fat on everything except for the engine. So let's pass this ugly Tesla Model X. Really don't like the design on those things. Anyway, put our foot into it, going up a turn here. And this is an interesting spot of Sunset in that you get elevation change, bad pavement, basically everything thrown at a car. And this is a great understanding of how does a 123-inch wheelbase deal in situations like this, especially when we have to now pass a slow-moving Prius. Interesting in that here we are, we're not driving as aggressively as we're back in Topanga, and now it feels like a 123-inch wheelbase car when you're not driving so aggressively, meaning the four-wheel steer isn't kicking in as much. And that's the biggest difference I've noticed in driving this thing now for, I want to say, about 5 days. But overall, I have to say that using this thing around town, you still feel like it has the manners of that size car, meaning like a mid-size to an E-Class than it does an S or a 7, especially in town driving. You drive it aggressively, you're like, man, this is a big car. This is definitely a luxury car. But now as we make our way out of downtown and past Will Rogers State Park over here, let's get away from driving dynamics and actually get to some of the stuff of living with it. The thing that I have to point out that I didn't notice when I drove this thing up at Skywalker Ranch is the radio knob. And you know me, I love me some real knobs, like tactile feedback or this ridiculous gamey controller thing here. I am not a fan of these things when you are piloting. This is a 4,700-pound car. I want to be able to touch a knob, a button, or some kind of scroll wheel here. In this case, there is an ingenious knob. Yes, there is a knob for volume, like this, but as part of the knob, you're looking at this and you're thinking, oh, well, what about the tuning knob for the radio or tracks or that kind of stuff? There isn't one over here. Well, it turns out it's part of the volume knob. It's just two different pieces. So this piece here is volume and this piece here is tuning. It's amazing. Actually,
NPR in the following message.
Okay, we're not going to listen to that because I don't have clearance from the folks at NPR, even though it's government. But this is, I noticed this within the first, I want to say 5 minutes of driving the car, and I have to say, makes a huge difference in the usability and UX of this vehicle. So let's say a technical open note to most UX designers in cars: please copy this, don't copy this. Now, there is one thing that absolutely annoys the crap out of me, and it's not just about this LS500 or even Lexus for that matter. It's about cars that have adjustable drive modes and auto hold features, and it's not just fancy cars like this. Because remember that Kia Stinger 4-cylinder we drove? That's got adjustable drive modes. Or that Hyundai Elantra GT, that's got auto hold. But in every case, including this $85,000+ car, it resets every time you restart the car, and for the life of me, I cannot understand why the hell engineers do this. If I'm going to spend the better part of $100 grand on this car, do I really want to hit two buttons every time I restart the car? That definitely does not fit into the definition of the relentless pursuit of perfection. Please sort that out. Arigato gozaimasu. Now, putting aside my pedantic complaining, what's it like to live with this thing? If you remember, back in September when we drove the base LS500 and the hybrid, I was kind of blown away. I didn't expect the car to be that good. And it wasn't just the way it drove or the way it sounded in that case, or even the way it looked. It now finally has its own personality. Now, does that personality translate to living with it? And I really had to spend a lot of time thinking about this, because how many episodes for the past almost 9 years have I told you I'm not a Lexus guy? I always couch it with I'm not a Lexus guy, starting with that RCF episode back in 2015. Well, here's the thing. Now that I've lived with this thing, it's changed my perception of Lexus. All because it now has a personality. So, if my perception can be changed, and I am a pig-headed ass, believe you me, can other people's perception change? Because yeah, there is a price advantage here. This is like, the way it's equipped, about 100 grand, 30 grand cheaper than a similarly equipped S-Class or a 7 Series. So I'm gonna turn this around to you guys. Is this about saving a couple of bucks on a fancy car, or is it about the metal? What would you choose? Jaguar XJ, S-Class, 7 Series, or you know what, because I'm so generous, K900 or G90. Which one would you choose out of all of these, or the Lexus? And let me know why. Let me know in the comments below, or via our social media, MotoManTV on Word, MotoManTV on Word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, until I see you next time, bis später.